All right, joining me now here on the Matthew Filipowicz Show once again is my good friend Anne Elizabeth Moore, and is the founding editor of Best American Comics, the former editor of Punk Planet, a professor at the Art Institute of Chicago, the founder of Lady Jars, and the author of many books including Unmarketable, Cambodian Girl, and New Girl Law, all of which and more you can find at AnneElizabethMoore.com. You can also follow her on Twitter at SuperAnne. Anne, thank you so much for being on the show again.
Absolutely. You didn't mention my cat's names.
Your what?
My cat's names.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. My bad.
Server and all-girl metal band, for the record.
Check them out, people. Don't. You're missing out here. So, Anne, you recently wrote a really amazing piece at Truth Out. Just one of the more in-depth studies I've ever seen. It's called Money and Lies in Anti-Human Trafficking NGOs. And again, it's so in-depth, and it really just digs into the money and the lies of NGOs, oddly enough. So tell us about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. And of course, with the Super Bowl having been so recently, you know, the hype and furor over what we think of as sex trafficking has been so strong. It's really sort of generated the way both conservatives and progressives tend to think about women's rights in the U.S. right now. But what this piece came out of was that the hype was getting so far away from what these organizations were actually doing that I wanted to find a way to get a very clear picture of what an anti-trafficking NGO does in the U.S. And so I looked at 50 of the most prominent anti-trafficking NGOs in the U.S., looked at what they were sort of using to market themselves, what they do with their funds, just a little bit. A future report will look at that more in depth. And then, of course, how much money they're pulling in. And it turns out that the top 50 anti-trafficking organizations in the U.S., the most prominent, I would say, generate over $500 million in private donations every year.
Wow.
Which is enormous. It makes them the 284th most, if they were a nation, they would be the 284th largest nation according to the UN's listing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, so let's dig into some of the actual find. I mean, other than the money, which is obviously like kind of jaw dropping how much money is actually there.
Yeah.
But like let's dig into some of the workings of these groups, because again, what you found is pretty damning.
Yeah, and so I spent a little bit of time looking at the claims that many of these organizations make, and of course, this is a problem that is twofold, right? For one, the claims that they're making is the reason why they're getting all of this money, which is itself removing services and funding from other organizations that are doing work that is provably effective, right? So first problem is economic regardless. But what they're claiming that they're doing is sort of, you know, sharing facts about human trafficking. And yet all of these organizations that I looked at concentrate their marketing on sex trafficking, which according to the UN is only 1/5 of the kinds of labor and human trafficking that go on in the world, right? So already the way that the U.S. is sort of narrowing what the field looks like is kind of crazy and ridiculous. And second of all, the ways that they're approaching that problem is a little bit crazy as well. And so I spent a good time in the piece, and the piece is really long, doing something that other organizations and other writers and some activists as well have concentrated on, which is debunking the mythology that human trafficking organizations use to make their claims. For example, there's a sex worker named Naomi Klein in the Pacific Northwest who actually has done amazing work debunking this often stated figure that the average age that girls enter the sex trade, and then it's sort of confused with the sex slavery, is 13. And what Emmy has done is actually trace the number of the ages of people who are caught in the FBI cross-country raids that actually supposedly, I mean, they go out and arrest sex workers, right, at will or not. And and what she found was that actually most of the people being arrested were 16 or 17, and there were no 5 to 8-year-olds being arrested, which means that the average age of a girl entering the sex trade can't possibly be 13. That's just not logical. It's not math, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yet this is something that, maybe 1/3 of the organizations that I look at end up claiming at one point or another.
Well, it's weird. You also, at the beginning of the piece, you focus a little bit of time at the top, kind of talking about how so many of these groups, they've been found to use incorrect stats that actually have been proven, even in some mainstream media. They use these incorrect stats, but they actually have not actually faced any actual consequences for the using of these stats. They actually, in fact, have gotten even more money now that it's been exposed that what they've been telling out isn't entirely true.
Right. And so what it becomes clear the more that you look at this, and the more that you realize that using facts to refute what's being said isn't having any effect, the more you realize that what they're doing isn't launching a political campaign or attempting in any way to address, a real human rights issue. They're launching a moral crusade, right? This is about enlisting your feelings and your heart in something that really, in the end, is provably untrue. And that's very concerning when we talk about both economic stability in the future, but also really thinking through issues of social justice on the ground in the U.S. right now. Yeah.
Well, I mean, so let's even dig into the money side of this. I mean, you mentioned the how much money that they're pulling in. Where are they getting this money from? Like, is it just private donations? Where is this actually coming from? And how are they getting that much money for this type of campaign?
Yeah.
And again, these are the 50 top organizations that pulled this in.
Exactly, and they're not 50 top in terms of money, but they're 50 sort of most prominent, most discussed.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to look at a wide range of organizations, and including those that are sort of bold-facedly ineffective, but also still pulling in money. And the opposite, like some organizations that are really doing good work and maybe not pulling in as much money as they should. And where they're getting the money is from a range of places. I mean, the work that I did with the lady drawers at Truth Out for the last year traced specific connections between the garment trade and the human trafficking organizations. And what I found there, of course, is that very, very often, human trafficking organizations are funded by the garment industry, which is, oh, great. Like, they're doing good work on the ground. They're really giving back to the community sort of at its face. But if you really look at how that works, what we can see is that the garment industry is funding organizations that go into places and arrest women, sometimes against their will, holding them on occasion, and or sort of economically coercing them, offering them new alternatives, and then reinstalling them in the garment industry, removing them from the only alternative that they have to the garment industry. So what the garment industry is funding, by funding human trafficking NGOs, is funding the assurance that there is no labor alternative for women in Cambodia besides the garment industry, which is really smart.
And horrible,
and
but
terrifying.
Smart.
Exactly. But it looks like in the U.S. that's a little bit, it's not quite as cut and dried as it is in Cambodia, but the next report that I do for Truth Out, which will be out in a month or so, we'll have more details about that.